Thank you for that song. That was awesome. I love the message there. There's a verse that just really stands out to me. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. Make me a vessel, make me an offering. Make me whatever you want me to be. I love that. If I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, my name is Stephen. I'm one of the deacons here at Oakview. Down in the front is my beautiful wife, Patty, and my oldest, Lillian. My other daughter, Bailey, is in the back. So, Robbie is gone today. He's at a wedding. He was gracious enough to offer to let me step in. Our message today is new wine. And that was just an awesome intro for it. So we've been going through our parable series, and today is this really short section. It's actually a couple parables back to back. It's very well known, the new wine and the old wineskins. A lot of us have heard it several times before. But let's begin with this, Psalms 128. And just like we've been doing, everyone together, Psalm 128. How happy is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. We'll be in Mark 2:18 through 22 if you want to follow along. So have you ever been absolutely certain of something, positive, and then found out you were 100% completely wrong? Husbands, if you can't remember, ask your wives later. They can give you a list. But seriously, it's especially bad when you're not necessarily wrong, but you assume a certain thing, you expect a certain thing, because you've done it. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it should be to you. That seems like the best way. And then you get there, and you find out it's not going to be at all like that. My family loves to go camping. I especially love the less settled campsites. I love to get out in nature, the water management lands, and the kind of out-of-the-way campsites where it's not a tent every 10 feet. I love to get out in nature. I don't know about you, but in my head, camping means certain things. And in the top 3 is definitely camping means we are going to have a campfire. And everything that goes with it. That means we are going to collect some dead wood, we're going to organize it, we're going to sit around a campfire, we're going to enjoy the sounds of nature, it's going to be awesome. It's just part of what camping is. To me, there's very, very little more relaxing than sitting around a campfire with a little bit of silence and the sounds of nature in the background. It's just, that's peace to me. It's awesome. So this one time we were going to Cayo Costa. It was our first time going there. If you've never been, it's beautiful. It was actually directly in the path of Ian coming in. It's an island off the west coast. So we were going to Cayo Costa, and it's an island. You can't get to it except by boat, which is cool because that means it's not crowded. It's a very large island. It has 7 miles of beaches that are beautiful. It has awesome fishing. That whole area is awesome fishing. It has most everything you can imagine. It has some really cool history. There's some interior trails you can walk, and you can see where the pioneers originally settled the interior of the island. It's a really cool park. So we're getting to our campsite, and we find out there is no burning of foliage or wood of anything that comes from the island. And they take this really seriously. Like, we hadn't been there but a few minutes before we heard a ranger coming around, putting out people's fires, collecting the things that they had collected to burn and putting them on his little cart, and giving them a warning, if I have to come back, if we tell you again, you'll be asked to leave. Like, they really take this seriously. But there's a camp store. So we're like, okay, camp stores, they have firewood, that'll be the plan. We'll just get firewood that way. We're good. Then we get there. Something had happened. Camp store's closed. No firewood. And in my head, I start throwing a tantrum like a disappointed 8-year-old. It's not camping without a campfire. It's just not. There is no camping without a campfire. That's sitting in the dark, staring at each other in the woods. That's just creepy and wrong. That's not camping at all. All of my assumptions and my expectations were off. Now, in reality, we were in one of the most beautiful places you could imagine. The campfire is such a tiny portion of your time when you're there. Not much had really changed about our plans. But what had changed was important to me. It was something that I expected. It was something that I assumed was going to be. That's the way it should be. They had really good reasons for the rules they have. For one thing, this is an island. It's its own little ecosystem. And so debris and dead wood are needed. I mean, the wildlife there needs debris and wood. The ground itself needs a certain amount of this stuff to sit and rot and give nutrients so that future growth can happen. If everyone came along and grabbed the dead things and burned them, the island would stop being the island. The reason I would go there would cease to be if the rules weren't different there than they were at other places. To top that, this is a coastal island. It's super windy, it's super dry, and most of the things people would grab to burn, like palm fronds, would blow around. This place would be wildfires all the time. They have great reasons for things being different there. My expectations, my understanding wasn't wrong in most other places. But for this place to be what it should be, the rules had to be a little bit different. So these feelings, the broken expectations are a big part of the lesson today. I'm going to go through the scripture, and it's fairly short, and if you're like me, I know I had read this many, many times, and I just skimmed over it and came out of it basically saying, Jesus said they don't have to fast. Got it. Moving on. That's not at all what he is saying. So, in typical God fashion, they ask him this question about fasting, and he gives them an answer, and it's only a few sentences. And in that few sentences, it's just layer upon layer upon layer. He answers their question. He points out why they're asking the question. He points out the misunderstandings or the false assumptions that led them to that question. He points them to the right understanding. He answers that question. It's just layer upon layer upon layer, but it takes a little bit of digging in to get it. In Sunday school class, we've been talking recently about how when we read Scripture, we need to be looking for the questions. You look for what's weird, what stands out, what makes you scratch your head, what causes a problem. Because those weird things, the things that don't make sense, those are usually where the gems are hidden. That's an invitation to pay attention and dig in here, because there's something here. You don't get it now, you need to really dig in. So as I read through it, just think about it, see what stands out to you, what questions you might have. We're in Mark 2:18 through 22. The disciples of John and of the Pharisees were fasting. Then they came and said to him, "Why do the disciples of John and of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskins, the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins. So let's go through some questions, because I know things just stand out to me. Number one, does Jesus have serious ADD or something? Because they asked him about fasting, and he starts to answer and immediately gives them advice on repairing ripped jeans and how to properly store their wine. There has to be some connection here. What's going on? Because I don't think Jesus has this kind of problem. Something's going on there. So we need to understand what that's about. Question 2. Why does he give them two parables that seem so close? I mean, they seem to mean the same thing. Gives them these two parables back to back about the old and the new. Is he just looking at these guys and thinking, oh, they might be a little dim. I should probably give this lesson twice. Why is he doing this? There's got to be a reason. Before he gets into the parables, he gives them this little short story about the bridegroom and the wedding party. And it seems to be the answer, but why doesn't he just give them a straight answer? Why is he using this to answer them? And if he's going to use this analogy, question 4, what does it mean? Because the things he's talking about don't mean the same things to modern readers. They treated weddings different. They treated fasting different. Everything that they're talking about is a little different than we would typically approach it. So we need to understand the context just to know how to even take what he's saying. And finally, what's the actual answer? Because does Jesus have a problem with fasting or not? He didn't seem to really answer that. Really quickly, that last one is easy. Does Jesus have a problem with fasting? No, obviously not. He ends his little story by saying when the bridegroom leaves, then they will start fasting. He tells them, the time is coming, they're going to fast. He never gets on to them for fasting. He never gets on to them for asking him questions about fasting. If you really want to dig in, they acknowledge him as a rabbi. They acknowledge the people with him as disciples. They're not accusing him of breaking the law, which includes fasting on the Day of Atonement. It's the only single day required by the law of God for fasting. They don't talk about that at all. They're not accusing him of that. That brings us a very important first understanding of their question. They're not asking about fasting as it pertains to the law. They're asking about fasting in ritual or ceremonial ways, man-made reasons for fasting. There's these various righteous groups that have taken on these rituals and these ceremonies. Pharisees, for example, fasted 2 days a week, Mondays and Thursdays. And John's disciples seems to have taken on the same or a very similar ritual because they're both asking the question here. So remember our original little story. Their question isn't about the law about fasting, it's about a preference about fasting. You can probably better understand their question as fasting on these days is what righteousness looks like to us. It's what we expect, it's what we want, it's what everyone else does. You say you're righteous, but you're not fasting on these days. Why? So that brings us to our first little story about the wedding party. Like we said, we need to put this into context. We already pointed out they're not asking about fasting as far as the law is concerned. They're asking about fasting in these ceremonial or ritual ways, these man-made rules. So really quickly, what is fasting? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here. So fasting is an act to prepare yourself for meeting with God. It's a somber time. It's a time of self-reflection, of humility. You are preparing yourself to go to God in prayer. In their man-made rules about fasting, they acknowledge fasting is a somber time, and there's some situations where that would not be appropriate. For example, at a wedding. They treated weddings way different than we do. Their weddings were massive. Their weddings were typically a week-long celebration for all of the friends in the family. Everyone would come and stay together, and it's like a week-long party. It was nonstop. It was supposed to be the most joyous time in that family's life. It would not be appropriate for someone to show up and diminish the celebration by saying, "Oh, I'm fasting." So these righteous groups, these organizations, the Pharisees, all the different groups, they have these rules about fasting, and they acknowledge fasting as a somber time. So you are supposed to fast. You're supposed to follow this. This is what righteousness looks like. But in these situations, it would not be appropriate. So you're not allowed to fast at your friend's party, at your friend's wedding. It just wouldn't be right. So they have their own rules. You're supposed to do it. You're not supposed to do it during these times. So let's reread Jesus' answer in Mark 2:19 and 20, understanding the context there. Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days." So he's pointing out to them, this is a time of celebration. This is a joyous time for my disciples. They shouldn't be fasting right now. But wait a minute. Right in the middle, he drops a bombshell. The bridegroom. He talks about himself as the bridegroom. Well, if we've been coming to church for a while, maybe you hear bridegroom and you think Revelation, or you think Paul's letters referring to the church as the bride of Christ. But he's not talking to modern Christians. He's talking to Old Testament Jews. They only have one bridegroom to the Jews. There's references all through the Old Testament, but just as a touch point, Hosea 2:16, "And it shall be in that day, says the Lord, that you will call me my husband and no longer call me my master." There is only one husband to the Jews, and they know it. It's God himself. God himself is the bridegroom to the Jews. And in Jesus' answer, this is great, he understands their question. He gives them this story so they would understand, even by your own rules, my disciples wouldn't fast right now because this is a joyous time. But in his answer, he's pointing out, but do you realize who you're talking to here? Do you know what's going on? You're asking God about this. He's pointing out their misunderstanding of the situation that's even leading them to ask these questions. You're talking to God. Why are you worried about this? I mean, if God comes into my house and God is going to have dinner in my house, the last thing I'm paying attention to is whether or not his elbows hit the table, or if he follows whatever other rules I have in my house. So he's pointing this out to them, like, I get your question, here's an answer, but do you really understand what's going on here? Do you know who you're talking to? I want to give one other reference. It's Jeremiah 31 about the bridegroom and the husband, because it fits so well here. "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord." I bring that one up because of the references in it. We're going to get into this, but look at the new, the old, the broken. We're going to come back to this concept. So he's getting into this pair of parables now after his little bridegroom story. The parables that Jesus gives, they have these links in them to help our understanding. And sometimes Jesus will spell things out for us, like the parable of the sowers or the soil. Jesus will describe, well, this is what each type of soil means. This is what the birds are. This is what the seeds are. This is what the thorns are. And if you take all of these things that you understand and you read the story, it makes so much sense. It broadens it out and it helps you understand this really big concept with the parable. That's the point of the parables. But here he's only giving us the parable, and he doesn't spell it out. So you have to dig for the answers. We are left to figure out the meaning, but the only thing that makes sense to me when it talks about the old and the new and who he's talking to are the covenants. We're told over and over again, Old Testament and New Testament, what Jesus is doing. I'm coming to bring you a new covenant. I'm making a new covenant with you. So let's reread these parables, keeping that in mind. We'll start on 2:21, Mark 2:21. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, or else the new piece pulls away from the old, and the tear is made worse. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskins, and the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins. These parables that he uses, they're not meant to be confusing for someone who digs in, for someone who's trying to get the understanding. They're meant to help us understand a broader concept. So real quick, we're going to run through it just to make sure we understand the context again, kind of like the marriage. We need to know what the words he's saying mean before we can try to get symbolism behind them. First, with the cloth, there is unshrunk cloth in an old garment. Not a lot of our younger people sew anymore, but most of us do understand that cloth shrinks. We know what it is to put some clothes through the washer and dryer and get it out 2 sizes too small and not have anything to do about it. So we know that cloth shrinks, and cloth shrinks just through time. I mean, your clothes, it's not unusual for them to get a little smaller over time. As you wear them, as you use them, as they get washed over and over, they shrink a little. So we know the concept. This is why we can buy pre-shrunk clothes or pre-shrunk cloth. I mean, it saves us from that. They're treated so that they are already old garments when we get them. We don't have to worry about that. Now, if one of these old garments gets a rip or gets a hole, and you run to the store and you buy a brand new piece of cloth, and they didn't have the option to get pre-shrunk cloth. They were getting new cloth. So they run out and grab a new piece of cloth, and they patch the garment. Over time, that patch is going to shrink also. And as it shrinks, it's going to tear away at the seams, and your tear is going to be worse than it was in the first place. So that's fairly simple to understand. We'll go on to the wine. The wine parable, no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine bursts the wineskins, the wine is spilled, and the wineskins are ruined. New wine must be put into new wineskins. Again, not a lot of people nowadays are out making their own wine and using the traditional wineskins. So the process, when they were making new wine, they had to put them into new wineskins. They're essentially leather pouches. That's all it was. But it had to be a new one. It had to be, as they put the new wine in it, the new wine is still going to continue to ferment. It's still going to continue to develop inside the wineskin. And that's going to change its chemistry, and it's going to produce gases and things. And as that changes, the new wineskin has to be pliable. It has to be able to move with what the new wine is doing. It has to flex and move, and eventually what's inside will become old wine, and the wineskin will become an old wineskin, and it will have kind of stiffened. It'll harden into the shape that the new wine made it as the procedure happened. So if you were to put new wine into an old wineskin that was already stiffened and shaped by the process of the wine, The new wine would begin to push, and the old wineskin couldn't flex anymore, and it'll burst. And so you ruin both things. Now, before I go any further, I want to make it clear what Jesus is saying and not saying here. Does Jesus say old wine is bad? No. Does he say the old wine was wrong? No. Does he say the old garments need to be thrown away? They were trash? No. Most of us know old wine is the good wine. Old wine is valuable. Most of us know that most of your favorite pieces of clothing are your old ones. They're comfortable, they're familiar, these old things are good. So he's not saying that the old was bad or that the old was wrong. Just like he's not saying the old covenant was bad or wrong in any way. He doesn't say that. He just says, that was the old, now there's the new. He gives these two parables. Look at the difference between them, because I believe what he's doing by this doubling up, he's essentially explaining the ways of the world to the people asking the question. If you try to make the new fit onto the old, it's going to pull apart. It's not going to stay. If you try to contain the new within the old, you're going to ruin both things. It's not going to work. Fit in the understanding, he's talking about the covenants here. The old covenant has been broken. Remember that Jeremiah verse we read? It has tears. The new covenant is not here to be a patch for the old covenant. It can't be. You have to treat it as it's new. The new covenant cannot be wrapped around and contained by the old covenant. It can't be. It's new. You have to treat it that way. Think about the question that they're asking about fasting. The old covenant has given them expectations and rituals and ceremonies, and these traditions hold meaning to them based on the process of the old covenant. These trappings are the delivery mechanism. They're the vessel for the old covenant, but they're not the old covenant itself. They're not the wine. They're just what they learned by holding the old covenant. So he's telling them this new covenant is a new thing. It needs new wineskins. It needs wineskins that are pliable. It needs wineskins that are willing to be molded by the process of the new wine. You can see these two parables essentially laying out the folly of either trying to patch the old covenant with the new or to contain the new with the old. It's not going to work. So now the heart of what he's actually saying. I want to cover something I didn't see in this passage until I really dug in when we did our Mark series a while back. The people who are asking Jesus this question are Pharisees, disciples, and John's disciples. But we're told many of Jesus' disciples came from following John. They followed these rituals. At some point they stopped, because now they're being asked, why don't they fast? They would have followed these traditions. This is what righteousness looks like to them. This is what's expected. This is what fits in. This is what's right. And we're not told the situation that happened, but at some point they stopped, seemingly because Jesus told them. We don't know what exactly happened. We don't know if it was a fasting day and Jesus told them, go ahead and eat. Or maybe they thought it was fasting, but they see Jesus eating, and he says, no, it's okay. Whatever the situation was that made them stop, they listened. They were willing to say, all of my understanding, all of my expectations are based on this is what righteousness looks like. But Jesus said, stop. That's more important. I need to change. Remember the verse out of the song, I will lay down my old flames to pick up your new fire? I had desires and understanding and expectations. They looked this way. They're not important compared to what you're about to do. I have to set that down to change, to try something new. The voice of God was more important than their own understanding of the situation. I think it's very easy for us to skim over this parable as unimportant because it's so small and it's seemingly easy to understand. And even if we spend a little time and we understand the context and what's actually being said, it's still fairly easy for us to read over it and say, it's about the old covenant and the new covenant. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It's still easy for us to overlook it. Remember the verses out of our song. So I yield to you and to your careful hand. When I trust you, I don't need to understand. Make me a vessel. How often do we let our assumptions, our expectations, our rituals and traditions stop us from being the new vessel? They stop us sometimes from carrying the new wine. Just like with what Jesus is talking about with the disciples and fasting here, the rituals and expectations aren't bad things. He never says they're bad things. It's not wrong to desire righteousness. It's not wrong to pursue following the law. And having some expectations about what that looks like could be useful. But when righteousness himself steps in and says, no, you need to do it different, do you listen to righteousness himself, or do you hang on to your own understanding? Even just this understanding of the transition from the Old Testament or the Old Covenant to the New Covenant, this is kind of based on the same concept. And a lot of times people misunderstand this. Just like the old wine and the new wine are both wine. They perform the same function, they do the same things, they work the same way. The God in the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament are the same God. They work the same way, they're desiring the same things, they're going towards the same goal. People try to turn these into something completely different. They're not. The delivery method may have changed, but what's inside is still God, the same God. So he didn't say the old vessels, the old wine, the old covenant was bad. He says, I need something new. I need something pliable. Because there's been a change, and I need new vessels that are pliable to go with what's going on now. The new delivery method that needs to be new so it can be shaped by the new process. Not only Jew, but all people. Not only Jerusalem, all nations. Not only the temple, carried by my people. I need new wineskins that are pliable enough to take that and work with it and understand it and be shaped by it. The shaping of a new vessel, this desire by God, is not really new itself. It calls us to newness because we get set, we harden. It calls us to newness, but God didn't change. It's how God works. Throughout the Old Testament, that's been true. Will you listen to my voice over what you understand and what you expect and what you desire? You can see this same character of God through the prophets. We mentioned Hosea earlier. God asked Hosea to go marry a prostitute. That's not what righteousness looks like. But when he heard it, is he going to listen to the voice of God? Or is he going to say, that doesn't sound like righteousness to me, so no? He has to be pliable. I really love in Isaiah, you see these kind of baby steps God goes with goes through with Isaiah. He tells Isaiah, I'm going to feed you with ravens. There's a famine going on, and I'm going to send ravens to you with food. Ravens are unclean birds. They're not allowed to touch Jewish food. But God says, I'm going to send you food with ravens. Isaiah has to say, wait, what's going on? The voice of God is saying something that doesn't line up with what I understand about the law. He has to be pliable. Then God says, now I want you to go into Gentile territory because an unclean family is going to take care of you. You can see these baby steps where God is working to make Isaiah pliable, to make him understand, listen, it's about my voice, not what you think, not what you understand. The struggle and that desire did not change. Christians still need to be made new, like Corinthians tells us. To be willing to listen to God's voice over our own preferences, our own desires, our own understanding, our expectations. Too often we let these other things, even really good things, raise themselves up to be on par with the voice of God himself. C.S. Lewis called this Christianity plus, or Christianity and. And our pluses can be great things. They can seem right. Christianity and the righteousness of God, that has to be a good thing, right? But at some point, what happens when God steers you in a direction that your expectation says is against the law? Like Hosea with the prostitute, or Isaiah with the ravens. At some point, something's going to happen, and God's going to tell you something that doesn't line up with what you expect. Do you listen, or do you pull away, like the patch, trying to blend the old and the new? Or how about Christianity and the complete loving forgiveness of Jesus? That's a great thing. But what happens when God steps in and steers you in a direction that everything you understand says, that doesn't seem loving? Abraham and Isaac, all of Israel getting sent into exile. This doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem loving, God. What's going on? At some point, you're going to have to make this decision between the voice of God and whatever your plus is that you've raised up. I think we all have things that are striving to be our plus. They're constantly on the verge, trying to be on par with the voice of God. They're trying to be that important to us. There can be nothing else on par with the voice of God. If we're going to be pliable, new wineskins, if we're going to be able to listen to the voice of God and be vessels for the new wine, to hold it and to pour it back out. So how do we do this? How do we actually take this lesson and use it? I mean, okay, sort of understand it now. What do you do with that? Well, some of the big ways we talked about last year. Remember when we did the spiritual disciplines? They did several Sundays on spiritual disciplines. That's a big portion of this. It's various forms of prayer and Bible study and things that are just there to help us remember who God is, to submit to him, to listen to him, to help us remember his presence. We make room for him so that he can act within the room we make for him. Another Bible study I've been listening to has been saying it this way: if we will make space for God through our time and our intentional submission to him and our actions, not just any actions, not just actions we think are righteous, actions that are aimed at making space for God, for being ready to move with his voice. We're making room for him to work. There's dedicated prayer times, there's different types of Bible studies, there's memory verses, there's devotionals, there's practicing the presence of God. There's hundreds of different ways you can make space for God in your life. And they look different, and some may work for some and not for others. Some may not work for your career or your life situation, but there's others. You look for ways to make space for God in your life. The point is, they seek nothing more than remembering and submitting to God. That's it. That's their focus. That's their purpose. And when you do that, you make a space for Him, and I've yet to see God waste the chance to fill that space, to step in and speak and give you the new wine and be ready to mold you with what He's doing. That's what I take as the little gem out of this parable. It takes some digging to get there, but it's a big lesson. This understanding that this is a new covenant must be put into a new vessel, that it must be pliable to His will, seeking to be filled, ready to be molded, to receive the new wine, and to pour it out again. So I'm going to close up as they come up for some music. I'd like to invite any of us who do not know what the new wine tastes like, if you need to desire, or you desire to pursue Jesus, feel free to come up. We'd love to speak with you, to talk with you, get to know you.